This video is going to step you through creating an emissive material to light the scene in Unreal. This is to go along with Chapter 5 in your Unreal Engine 4 Shaders and Effects Cookbook, Beyond Traditional Material Use, and this is the first video for this chapter. So what we're going to do is we're going to work in the 0501 start scene. And we're going to create an emissive material for this lamp that's just kind of sitting on the floor. And the first thing we're going to need to do is to make sure that we turn off the lights for this scene so that once we get an emissive material on there, we can actually see it casting light everywhere. So let's first locate that BP Light Studio. And we're going to make sure that where it says use HDRI, we uncheck it so that we get a blank screen. You might need to do a rebuild of your lighting to make sure that we do have all the lighting information off in here. But there's not too much to the scene, so hopefully it doesn't take too long to do that. So next, we are going to start building our material. So I have my folder that I'm working in that I did save out my map in. I'm going to choose a material and I'm going to call this one M_light bulb. And then I'm going to open it up. We've sort of kind of worked with this kind of stuff before in a previous one when we were making the hologram. So we're going to kind of play around with it a little bit more to get much better results though, and in a way that's meant to kind of light the scene. With the hologram was meant more just kind of to look like it's glowy. So when we want to create materials that look like they're glowing, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have our main node here selected, and then over here in the details where it says underneath material where it says shading model, we want to change it from default lit to unlit, because if you remember, what this means is now lighting in the scene won't affect this material, so we're just going to see it as is. Your options here definitely changed. Basically all you have left is that emissive color that we're going to be working with. We're not going to use this world position offset. So first things first, let's kind of start building this out. The first thing we're going to work on is getting that color, our base color, into here that we're supplied with in here. So I'm going to hold down T and click so that I can get my texture sample. And for this texture sample, I'm going to find T_lamp_color. And that's this one right here. And it's just kind of like this pinky sort of thing. It's going to kind of make like a marbly sort of looking glowing lamp. It's going to end up looking pretty cool. So we kind of want to push this a little bit. We kind of need to get it glowing because as is right now, it's not really going to, it's okay, but we really kind of want to push this a little bit more. So we're going to make a cheap contrast node, and we're going to feed into there a scalar parameter that I'm going to rename so it's a little bit easier to find. This is going to be called contrast intensity. And we're going to set this to a value of 2. Just so that we can get some more contrast out of here. So I'm going to feed this into here and feed this into here. So if we take a look at what we get, it does turn it black and white, but we are able to get much more contrast out of that. So what we're kind of looking for is getting like those really dark areas so that we can utilize that so that we have some areas that glow really bright and some areas that glow a little bit dimmer to really get kind of like that marbly sort of look to it. So we do need to build that color back into it, since it does turn it to a black and white. We can feed this back into a multiply. So I'm going to hold down M and click, and I am going to feed, let's see, sorry, hold on. I'm going to feed the texture sample into A, and then the cheap contrast into B. And if we turn this on, we see we get the colors going back onto, or it's multiplying those colors back onto there. So let me move this out of the way a little bit. We're then going to make another multiply. Hold down M and click. And I'm going to feed this multiply into this multiply, and I'm going to make a new scalar parameter that I'm going to rename as intensity, because it's going to be kind of helping to control the intensity of the glowing, and you'll see this in a second. So let's see, let me just make sure. So watch this. So I'm going to feed this into here. Let me turn this node on, and we're going to bump up that intensity. So rather, 1 would be just how it was. We're going to bump it up to 500. So watch what it does when I bump it up to 500. Now we're really starting to get that glow effect. It's a little bit contrasty because we have like those really dark areas, but those really light areas are really, really bright. So next we are going to kind of work on making those dark areas not quite so dark. And we're going to do this by finding some space up here. So this is kind of we'll keep this kind of down here. Up here we're going to make a multiply, another multiply. This is going to get fed into here. We're then going to make another scalar parameter called dark area brightness. That's going to kind of control the darker areas. So let me feed this into here. And I'm just going to give it a value of 1 for now. We can always come back and adjust this later if we need to. We then need to combine this together. So let me start previewing this so we can see what it looks like. So not too much going on now. We can always control it later, and I'll show you how we can adjust that. But we need to combine this multiply with this multiply. So what do we do when we need to combine two things together? We use a lerp. So I'm going to hold down L and click. I'm going to feed this multiply into A. I'm going to feed this multiply into B, and then I'm going to utilize this cheap contrast as the alpha. Because if you remember, that's that black and white image that kind of swoop it around a little bit. That's that black and white image that we used to multiply, to cut out kind of like the darkness. Where now we're controlling the darkness with this one. So last, we would just feed this lerp into the emissive color. So let's take a look at what this is doing and see if we need to adjust that dark area brightness at all. So let me stop previewing it. We get that. It might be a little bit dark. We might not want it super contrasty. What if we set this up to like a 3? Do you see how it's getting? Let's kind of bump it up really high. Let's do like a 10. and it's kind of looking good. That's kind of what I'm trying to go for, where we have some light area. Take it down a little bit. I'm changing my mind. 7. Let's drop it down to a 7. It's looking good. We get the really bright areas, the darker areas. They're still kind of glowing, but they're not nearly as glowy. And this is it as far as our material goes. So I'm going to hit save it all out and close this and go back to here. So I'm going to find that light in my scene. Oops, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong spot. We are going to go to the SM lamp, and I am going to apply the material to this right here. We don't want that start one. Make sure I'm putting the right one in. There we go. And what we can do now is once it's in there, we can see it in our scene. I'm going to hit my build and let this build. So a couple things we can check just to make sure things are working correctly is that if it's not quite working, a setting you might want to check is here underneath the details. Underneath lighting, you do want to make sure that you have use emissive for static lighting checked on if it's not casting light anywhere. That's what's going to make it bake the lighting out into your scene. So there are some areas if you do want to kind of tweak this to make it better, maybe it doesn't look quite as good. And we're going to want to find those in our world settings. We're going to mess with like the light mask settings. And we can do that if you can't find those world settings, it's just underneath window, world settings, and it might pop up over here next to your details. And we're going to want to look at these light mask settings, and if we can tweak these, we can get a much better kind of look. Like the lighting will end up looking a little bit better. So I'm going to set this equal to this first static lighting level scale to 0.3. The number of indirect lighting bounces I'm going to bump up to 30. I'm going to set the number of skylight bounces from 1 to 7. The indirect lighting quality is going to go from 1 to 5. And the indirect lighting smoothness, I'm going to bump up to 3. So by changing all of these, it is going to possibly affect how well things work in here. So like the speed of things. So if you could also turn on, let's see, make sure generate ambient occlusion is turned on. That can help too. Oh, I'm sorry, just use ambient occlusion one. That's good too. Some of these might already be set. It's kind of, depending on some of your base settings. But once you get those set, we could try to build it again. And see what we get with our lighting. And I paused the video while it built, so hopefully you can kind of see the junk that kind of disappeared right here. It smoothed it out a lot more. It might take a few minutes for yours to build. It really depends on how powerful your computer is. But generally those settings you'd want to change after you're kind of done and you just kind of like let it go and let it sit. If this does end up being too bright, we could always come in and tweak some settings in here. Like if we did kind of want to push maybe that darkness down a little bit, we could always come back in and readjust this. Maybe it just was a little bit too much, so maybe I drop it down to like a 2. And we can see that a little bit better. Another setting you could always try to tweak is if you find your post-process volume, we could try to adjust underneath the details, specifically our, where did that go? The bloom. We could try setting like the intensity to, lower. So if I set it to like a 0.1, it's a slight change. So like if it's set to 1, you can definitely see it. 0.1, it's a little bit less. Shouldn't be super foggy on an interior like that, so maybe that would work a little bit better for us. But yeah, that's it. That is the light bulb. Let me open this up one last time in case you need to see it. And I will do another shader in the next video.